we can't organize a revolution online. We're going to have to have meetings, get in one another's faces, sit down, have some difficult conversations. Because if you want to be honest, even in our movement spaces, there are silos, there's division. There are people who don't work with this one and that one, who's too radical, who's too liberal, and, really make an assessment, because otherwise we're not going to survive this moment. I'm just being honest. It's no way we can fight each other and them.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Tamika D. Mallory is a trailblazing social justice leader, a movement strategist, globally recognized civil rights activist, co-founder of Untold and the historic Women's March that we all experienced in 2017. And she served as the youngest ever executive director of the National Action Network. This lady has been laying down some tracks in some very important spaces. Her speech in the wake of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, entitled State of Emergency, was dubbed the speech of a generation by ABC News. That's how impactful she has been. Ms. Mallory is an expert in the areas of gun violence prevention, criminal justice reform, and grassroots organizing. And we talk a little bit about all of that as we journey with her through her new memoir, I Live to Tell the Story, a memoir of love, legacy, and resilience. It's out now. We'd like you to get a copy of it. I think you will enjoy it when you do. We'll talk about that and enjoy the experience of Tamika D. Mallory right here on the Michael Steele podcast right after this. Everybody, welcome to the Michael Steele podcast. I don't know. We are in week 4.
That's it.
we are in week 4, and I'd be damned if it doesn't feel like week 40, week 400.
Sure.
I'm excited to welcome Tamika Mallory to the podcast. She has a great new effort out, a very personal story that she's been sharing that I think ties into so much of how this moment informs us and we think about our own personal journeys. I Live to Tell the Story, a memoir of love, legacy, and resilience. Tamika, welcome. So good to have you.
Thank you for having me on your show. That's good. I had to write a book again to get here, but I made it.
The sister comes out of the gate swinging. I love it.
I made it.
I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're here to talk to us about your story. I mean, I think what people don't oftentimes appreciate is the other side of being the daughter of civil rights icons and a leader, and being in that space. Talk first about that framing for you, being the daughter of a Harlem civil rights activist, and how that sort of shaped what your upbringing looked like and informed you as an adult in this moment.
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me on. And, my parents were activists since I was a little girl, so I don't know anything different. I always tell people, just to give them a visual, when you're young and your parents make you go to church or your grandparents make you go to church, it's like no option. The household, everybody knows.
Right.
On Sunday, we clear the house out, you're going to church.
You're going to church.
Right. And so we did go to church, which was not optional either. My mom made sure I went to church, but my dad wasn't a church guy. He was a movement guy. So Monday through Saturday, we were doing something almost every day. If it wasn't homework, it was the meetings in the building where we, were working on community development. They went to the precinct council meetings to know who all the police officers were in the neighborhood and work on youth activities. But then on Saturdays, we attended rallies, and specifically at National Action Network, Reverend Al Sharpton's organization. Mm-hmm. So my parents were there since Reverend Sharpton started NAN, which is over 30 years ago. And I'm 44, so that tells you right there that I've not had a moment where I was not involved in something. In fact, I remember when I first met Reverend Sharpton, I must have been 3-4 years old, little person, and he was rallying for some reason. He had the medallion at that time,
Right.
And my parents, they took me up to him, and I looked up. I'm this little girl looking at this big guy, like, oh my God, he's this big, loud voice. And I never forget that. So this was very, very young. Then I of course, and I talk about it in the book, I went through those moments when I got older, and the influence of the culture was, what I wanted to be involved in. So I was like, man, I want to, marry one of these guys from New Jack City and belly move,
Right.
I want, yeah, like that was the culture. That's what was popping at that time. And these folks got me like in Kentacloth going, dashikis, going to, rallies. And I was like, this is pretty, like, I felt like I was in prison when I was young because I didn't understand.
Right.
So by the time I got to be about 15 years old, maybe 16, I started making it more difficult for me to go to the rallies, and it was a big challenge. My parents they dealt with a lot with me being a runaway and, just trying to find my own voice. My dad said during an event that we did for my first book, he stood up and spoke in front of a big group of people, and he said, she was faster than we could handle. We didn't know what she had in her. They had no idea. They were just being normal parents,
right.
taking me for whatever they thought was best for me, but they had no
Right.
idea that the leader was developing in this way, So, so 15 through 17, 18 is a tough time. It's bad choices being made, hanging out with the wrong crowd, doing all the things that you try to protect your children from at that age. And then I got pregnant with my son's father. He and I got pregnant, and my son was born by the time I was 18 years old. So that's another part of life. I don't know anything other than being a mother, because I've been a mom for 26 years almost at this point. And, my son's father was murdered 2 years later. So my child, after his second birthday, his father was shot to death and left in a ditch for 2 weeks before he was discovered by a woman who was walking her dog. The dog, noticed his sneaker was caught on a branch. He was kind of hanging over a cliff in Pennsylvania. And I think that was it for me, Michael. It was like, oh, this is terrible. I always tell people that, everybody comes around after a funeral. You see everybody, you hear. So the common thread was, oh, Pookie got shot last week, or, Malcolm also got killed, or, your cousin went to jail for killing somebody else.
Yep.
And the stories were just, it was resonating with me in a way. And so I got the newspaper out, and for the next week or so, I just kept reading to see where were these stories, because obviously if I'm hearing it, America must care.
Gotta be it, right?
Gotta be a story. And I couldn't find anything except the Daily Blotter. The Daily Blotter had all of these stories in it about, Black men or others being killed. And that meant that's the criminal section. That's telling you, be mindful of such and such boulevard because they're shooting over there. But there was no heartfelt story about these people's lives, what happened to them.
Who these individuals were.
They don't tell you anything. They just tell you Black male, 25 years old, shot on such and such street, Lenox and, 7th Avenue, 125th Street, period. So I got, because of course I'm in the rallies, I'm going every week as a part of the family tradition. And I met Erica Ford and A.T. Mitchell, who were two major gun violence prevention activists, organizers, and leaders in New York. We got together and decided that we were going to do some work. And we started out with $0 in New York City, going to grassroots groups for gun violence prevention. It was all about politics. It was all about legislation. No one wanted to fund the groups. After we did some work together, which I outline in the book, we got the first $5 million. And now it's over $100 million that is being distributed to people who have been on either side of the gun, families, people who are actively engaged in a holistic approach to gun violence prevention. So that's how it started. And, I think that's, sort of where I cut my teeth, if you will. My first big organizing was around gun violence prevention.
You write in the book, quote, over time, I learned to define my successes through a framework of purpose. I needed to re-identify the why and reason for my existence in my field. For me, unlocking purpose was like operating a box of butterflies. Once they take flight, they will never return to the confines of that box the way they had been before.
Yeah.
The story you just told, that part of that journey, sort of give some insight into how you discovered your purpose with all those other things going on, from that, moment as a 3-year-old meeting Reverend Al, to the rebellionist period of your teenage years, to then becoming a mother, the loss of your child's father, and then the recognition that no one at the end of the day really gave a damn about his death. That they categorized his death no different than they categorized some thug who got shot over Lenox Avenue. That discovery of self, how important was that for you ultimately? In other words, at no point in those stages did you dismiss what was happening around you and just, well, that's just being poor and Black, or that's just being a Black woman, or that, you know what I'm saying? You seem in the writing of this book, I Live to Tell the Story, you put it all inside in a way that you were able to mature it into something else.
Yeah. I mean, I think, similar to a pastor, I keep going back to the church because that's the closest reference that I have, the most familiar reference to a calling, right? And I think that was always in me. I didn't know that,
Right. But no one ever really does at first.
I didn't know. I just thought I was too talkative because that's what I was told for my entire life. Even my parents were like, you talk too much, just go to school. And all we want you to do is just sit there, do what you're told, and you can come home and talk all you want, but just don't talk in school. But that was hard to reconcile because when going to these rallies and being in the community and watching my parents, I was being taught to be a bold, outspoken person that when you see something, say something. And I talk about in the book going to Catholic school and what it was like being a young Black girl with coarse hair, with pigtails and darker skin in the same environment with young Latina girls who were lighter skin. They had long hair, we looked different in many ways. And in school, we were treated differently. And so I would speak up. Well, the teacher would say, Tamika, you need to be quiet. And I would say, well, Marissa just finished talking, so I don't understand. And they would say, no one asked you. You just need to do what I say. But that was never acceptable for me. So I was going to ask another question and maybe even ask to see the principal. That's just the type of child I was.
Well, I need to take this up with your boss. I'm sorry.
I talk to the principal. I'm being, mistreated. But it didn't stop with me. If I saw it happening to another student who also happened to look like me, I would say something as well. And again, my parents just think, at the time, I think even like I said, my dad, he eventually realized that for them, it's a nuisance because you're getting calls at work. You have to come in and sit in the classroom. I'm being punished all the time. That's what they're trying to work every day. And I'm just always in the middle of something. But they had no idea that what was happening was that I was budding. It was a butterfly that was, never going to be the same, because after each experience, I just got stronger at it. I was like, oh, so next time I need to call a meeting with the principal, my parents, and the teacher so I can say it to her face, because she lies when she talks to the principal, right? Then I want to get other kids involved. Like, so didn't you hear? Didn't you hear what happened? That's just the type of kid I was.
Oh my God. You were exhausting as a child.
That was exhausting. I know I was. I apologize to my parents regularly. They've actually, at this point, they've said, we got it. Like, you've done wonderful. We love you. You're good. Please stop. Because I would just call it. And I'll be honest, especially when my son, who, as he's been growing up, the things I've had to deal with him, I'm like, Mommy, I'm so sorry, Mommy.
And your mom was sitting there going, really?
Mm-hmm. So now my son has my granddaughter. She's 2 years old. And I tell her every time I speak to her, give him hell, baby girl. Just give him hell.
You note in the book that your mom and your dad wanted a fighter who held faith in this idea of possibility. So in one sense, while your mom and dad may have bemoaned those phone calls and bemoaned those episodes, it was part of what they brought out in you. It's part of what they instilled in you too, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, they knew they wanted me to be a strong young Black girl. They wanted me to have information, education, and they absolutely wanted me to know that I was Black and that I am supposed to be proud. So that's what they wanted, but they definitely did not account for the fact that my mouth would just move all the time.
Well, so you and I apparently suffered from the same gene because I've got literally directly across from me something, and folks who listen to the podcast know I've talked about this in the past. Like you, I too was somewhat of an activist in my opinion and in my review of things around me. And my mother, when I was about 14 years old, finally took me aside after an event at my high school. We got back home and I'm sitting there beating my breast at how well I'd done and all this other stuff in this room of all these folks and talking and speaking. And my mother looked at me and she said, "You just need to learn to shut up and listen." And it's like, boy, you run your mouth too damn much. You just need to shut up and listen.
Yeah.
Because you're missing half the stuff people are telling you because you just flapping your lips. So I have my mama's words in a frame sitting across from my desk, reminding me every day to shut up and listen.
Mm-hmm.
We learned that lesson, and as you did too, because it's really evident in the book that you learn that difference in how to execute that charge.
Yeah.
To shut up and listen. Because you note that organizing is more than holding a megaphone at a rally. Right. So you realize that at some point, all of the energy that's put into defending a position, expressing an opinion, pushing a narrative has to rest on something. And that something oftentimes is what you're hearing from people's experiences and their stories. What makes for that successful organizing in that vein? How do those pieces come together for you the way they have?
So, because I was raised so young in the movement, I am a grassroots organizer, like a door-to-door person. I use my social media, and I'm grateful that so many people follow me and look for messaging every day, which I try to do a good job of, maintaining that. But what gets me clicking and gets me moving is listening to the real life experiences of people that I see everywhere. So I'll give you just an example. We moved to Kentucky for the Breonna Taylor fight because it was during a pandemic. In fact, my mom, who is an Advent dancer, my mother used to be the dance instructor for 7 different dance classes in her community.
Wow.
She just, she dancing was what you couldn't beat her. Like, she could get out there with Debbie Allen dancing. And she had a stroke in March of 2020. And it paralyzed, which now is much better, thank God, but it did paralyze her left side.
Right.
And so she, doesn't dance anymore in that way. She still is out there, but it's a total different thing, as you can imagine. So when she came home from the hospital in the midst of a pandemic, the country has shut down. She doesn't know what the hell. When she was awake earlier in the day before the stroke happened, the world was normal. It was a little talk about, a
Right.
virus, but there was nothing. When she woke up from the coma, the world was shut down. The hospital
Right.
was shut down. Everything was completely different, two different worlds for her. And so we tried our best not to bring her diseases, or things.
Sure.
She
Yeah.
just couldn't get sick. We couldn't bring her a virus. We couldn't do any of that. So after traveling back and forth to Kentucky in a new environment with people I'd never met, we were outside. Everybody knows summer of 2020 was everybody outside everywhere.
Yep.
I thought it was dangerous to bring back to my mother the elements of what I was picking up being out there, knocking on doors, talking to people in community. And so I decided to live there in Kentucky for 30 days. That was the plan, that we would stay there for 30 days, set up shop, meet all the players, deal with the who are you and why are you here in my community,
Right.
and get to know Breonna Taylor through her family. We ended up being there for 4 months. Because when we got to Kentucky, this is what I mean by listening to the people. Fighting for Breonna Taylor was important. They were already doing it. It just wasn't getting the national and international attention that we hoped to bring when we got there. But that was one important part, very important. But there were people who were hungry. The city was shut down.
Right.
There
Right.
was only one grocery store anyway, which is a Kroger that was closed a lot of the times during the pandemic. They didn't have fresh produce. They didn't have a lot of things they needed. It was like everywhere else. People were really struggling.
Right.
Terrible time. So when we got there, after knocking on doors and telling people, Breonna Taylor, justice, no peace, no justice, no peace, they were like, yeah, but can I get a piece of chicken? Is that a part of the deal?
Right.
Like, we with you, but we need the chicken too.
Right.
So the reason why we stayed for 4 months is because we immediately began to organize people, bringing in trucks of food, bringing in supplies, helping people with baby pampers and wipes and sanitary things that they needed for the pandemic. We also caught COVID while we were there.
Yeah.
We became one with the community because we figured out that Breonna Taylor was just the thing to shine a spotlight on Louisville, but Louisville was struggling with a whole lot of other issues. And so that for me is kind of how I do my work. I like to go into communities. When we go to places, I always make folks laugh and I say, when we go to a community, people will automatically tell us, the pastor, whoever,
right,
organize, it's very dangerous on block so-and-so. Don't go over there. People get shot over there all the time. As soon as they finish talking to us, me and my crew, where you think we going? Block so-and-so, where it's dangerous, where all the things. And then later on, we'll see the organizer like, didn't we tell you that that's not the area you want to be in? And that's exactly where
the area you want to be in.
Exactly where we want to go. That's how we do our work. And that's how we built the relationships, incredible relationships around the country. I have to mention, when I say we, I'm talking about my Untold Freedom family, which is my organization.
Yeah, no, that and what you've just described in so many ways, Tamika, is the essence of vocation. It is the essence of calling that moves an individual to risk something greater than themselves, right? You're willing to take the risk for something greater than yourself. And that is the work in this community. So when people say, it reminds me oftentimes the stories of Jesus when the disciples, the apostles and others were telling Jesus, but you really shouldn't go there.
Yeah. Right.
Or we need to leave now, Lord, because these people are not too happy with what you're saying.
That's right.
Christ is like, that's not my problem. And it shouldn't be yours either.
That's right.
Right. And that's a hard lesson for us to take away in the work that we do. We're going to take a quick break. I want to talk about that work in the context of the here and now, in light of everything that's going on and what that means for your work. Tamika D. Mallory, she is a trailblazing leader, pioneer in the justice movement. It is such a treat to have her on the podcast. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more with Tamika right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the Michael Steele podcast. We're breaking it down on the ground with Tamika D. Mallory. It is really insightful for me, someone who really came into politics through a spiritual door.
Yeah,
I left a monastery to come into this world.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it's I'm really identifying with a lot of what you're saying, because in a real sense, your upbringing was that sort of, this is going to sound weird, but go with me on this, was sort of that monastic journey. In other words, where you learned to die to yourself. You realized that there was something more important than Tamika in whatever struggle you had to confront. And that is something that feeds into ultimately the work that you do. That is something that the people around you, Tamika, feed off of. One of my lessons of leadership is a leader, and I sense from reading the book and talking to you, you agree with this. A leader is always prepared to lead. There's not a moment where you're not ready.
Right.
But the real test of your leadership is when you allow others to lead, when you're prepared to follow, and what that looks like for you. How does that play out for you in the work that you're doing? You were very much involved in organizing the 2017 march, Women's March here in Washington, D.C., taking up and sort of pulling together forces that were bigger than yourself, right? I mean, there were a hell of a lot of folks came to town that weekend after the inauguration. And that required a level of organization, yes, but another level of, checking the ego, getting everybody on the same page, understanding what the mission is.
Remembering,
and more importantly, understanding what the mission isn't.
Oh man, wow. And that's the one. That was the most difficult part is, no, we're not here because Hillary Clinton didn't win the election, right? This is not your place that you're going to come to be the Hillary Clinton fan club. Did I vote for you? Absolutely. But that's not what we were attempting to do. And it was hard for people to understand because there were a lot of women, especially white women, who came to the Women's March and believed that Hillary should be the keynote speaker, right? Because this is what this is all about for us. And
right.
No. You see, the problem here is that you're forgetting that, first of all, racism, sexism, fascism, all these things, it didn't start with Donald Trump. So it's hard for us to just start and end at an election because this is so much bigger than that. There's no way I'm going to use my resources and time, and moreover, to expose myself to an environment that was very unsafe, because you had a lot of white women who showed up and had never done anything. They had never been involved in a movement at all. So they didn't know the lingo. They didn't know who we were. They didn't understand anything. I actually feel pretty sorry for some of them because they were like, what is this? This is not what I signed up for. I thought we were going to march. And it was going to be Hillary.
Can I just, as a quick sidebar, you're bringing back flashbacks. I had some conversation with some of the Black women who were involved with a number of their fellow white sisters in the this past presidential election for Harris, and they would have these. You remember these big calls, right?
Yeah.
And these white women, you could see from the Zoom on their faces, what?
Exactly. So imagine they were getting a dose of me, Linda Sarsour.
Oh my goodness.
Carmen Perez. We were and we were exposing them to other people that they didn't know anything about the music of Nina Simone and her poetry. And they didn't know anything about these books, these radical books that we were reading. Many of them only knew Angela Davis as, someone who was a criminal, who went to prison in the movement. That's what they knew. That's what their family told them.
Can you just that part of the story of protest to me has always been fascinating for white folks and how I look at how they look at this, because they always see it through the prism of criminality.
Right. That's it.
And never through the prism of protest, which is guaranteed in the Constitution.
Have Angela Davis speak. But we didn't just have Angela Davis speak. We also had people who would actually they were convicted and admitted that they committed crimes, like killing the person who assaulted them, or things of that nature. We opened it up for any type of woman who had a story to tell to be able to come and be a part of the Women's March. That was very hard for them to understand, because they believed it should be streamlined. Everybody should be clean and everything, and we didn't do that, because we know that when you're talking about advocating for women, you have so many different people with so many different stories. So we had to educate them on who Angela Davis really is, that she's a queen and a leader. And let me be clear, many of them were like, whoa, this is the world. Okay. I'm with you, and now some of them can speak better to the issue of race relations as it relates to women than we can, right? Like as Black folks, they're well studied, they're well versed, they still support us, all of that. But there was a small group, and they were very loud in their smallness. And, in many ways, I'll be just very candid, they terrorized us. They terrorized us. They helped to pick apart the Women's March. Even those who may not have understood what they were doing, they don't know that they're white tears. Like, Tamika Mallory stands up and says something in a meeting, and everybody says, oh my God, my feelings are so hurt. I just can't believe it would say this. And then the next thing you know, they're crying about it, and nobody's going to believe me, the Black girl, right? I have many white women who were part of the Women's March or around at that time, who have come to me and said, I did not realize what I was doing. I thought when I posted that the Women's March sucks because whatever their issue was, that it was just a post that I was going to make and everything was fine. I had no idea that there would be 5 articles written about you or other women of color from my little tweet. I didn't know. I thought I was just venting, and it ended up doing things that, really hurt us. So I would just say to you, Michael, the Women's March in this book is probably one of the more challenging parts for me to write. I mean, there were several, but the Women's March was hard to do because, what we experienced there put me in a real dark space thereafter.
And you can sense that when you're touching on that period. And it makes me curious, coming off of that and some of the stories that you share there, how do you see, in the face of what we see, because this is my thing now. I kind of lost my ish this past weekend.
We saw you. It's the footage for me where you're sitting like this to start out. You're usually like, Michael Steele. He's very, put together. You start out like, I'm just gonna say whatever the hell's on my mind. And I'll tell you something. That's what happened to me in Minneapolis with the speech that I did that went viral around George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. It was literally because I was in one of these moments. I don't care. I'm not writing down the right thing and the politically correct thing. I'm just going to say what it is. We're in a state of damn emergency. They want people to stop burning property. Fine. I don't support that. But who cares about that when people are actually dying? And that if you want us to stop being violent, so they say, you'll stop being violent.
Thank you.
Who goes first?
Thank
Like,
you.
people who got the tax dollars, who are, have jobs that are supposed to protect and serve, or are you putting it on people who have mental trauma from what we keep seeing happening to our people in this nation? And guess what? It resonated all over the world.
It did. No, it did. I mean, it launched and I think changed in many respects the trajectory of that conversation.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden now folks have to confront that truth. And I have this ongoing thing with a number of my MAGA friends where they don't objectively want to confront the truth. They persist in believing that this thing is good the way it is. And I'm like, it is until they come for you. And when they do, there is truth in that. When they do, and they've locked up Tamika and they've locked up Michael and they've locked up all these people, who the hell can be there to take your ass out of jail? Right? Who's going to be there to prevent you from having a hard time? So the question for me is
today. Hence where we are today.
And that's where I know I got to let you go because you got the book thing going, and I appreciate that. And I really, folks, I really emphasize getting yourself a copy of. There it is. I Live to Tell the Story. It is a memoir for sure, but it is so much more than just, oh, this is what it was like growing up. There's a lot in here to unpack. There are two things I want to hit you with before you go. One is I want to continue where we are because I think I definitely want to get this in. How do you, and this was my frustration this weekend when Simone asked me, so tell me what we should do. Can y'all just give a shit about this? Can you just give a damn for 5 minutes?
That's all we want you to do is care
about what's happening. So for you as someone who's organized in a very difficult space, on the heels of George Floyd, and then certainly beginning with the Women's March in 2017. How do you organize in this period? How do you get people to understand and appreciate why they need to, as I said in the clip, get off their fat ass and do something?
Say it. Well, first of all, you got to meet people where they are. So right now, one of the first things that we see bubbling up is folks saying we're boycotting these companies, right? I'm sitting at the center of this conversation around Target. You got Black women that go to Target and spend days in Target, literally 4 hours of just walking up and down the aisles, feeling like it's their safe space. Then they see the cowering to, if you will, someone like, Donald Trump and what he's doing with the DEI rollbacks. And so, I didn't organize a boycott. Most of the people I know, Senator Nina Turner and former Senator Nina Turner, and also Jamal Bryant, the people did. People just started saying, I'm not going back to Target. I have a woman who put in a comment section of mine, she said, listen, I closed my card at Target and I've spent $46,000 in there over the last 12 years that she's been going to Target. That's a significant amount of money.
It's real money
for someone to spend. And she said, and when I closed my card, she said, I walked in there, I closed my card. I was sick to my stomach that they would ever even consider announcing that they were rolling back DEI, right? So I think a part of it is that whether the talking heads and the super brilliant organizers do anything or not, the people are moving. People are getting upset. People are like, we need to do something. We're going to make an example of them. And I think that some of these companies are going to be a part of that. And to be quite honest, until you get to the midterm elections, it's probably going to be one of the only places that folks can respond and have impact. So I think that's going to be, something that is organic, that we are putting structure around, but yet it is organic. The other thing is we cannot normalize this. What you did on TV the other day, I was on MSNBC this week as well, last week as well. I'm making sure it's on my social media. We cannot allow it to be normal. Even if some people say, why don't y'all stop talking? Why don't you be quiet? We can't. We have to continuously tell the story, make sure that people know right now there's not enough attention on the federal workers that are being fired. How many of our people are caught in those numbers? And what conversations do we need to be having about how this will impact us in just a few weeks when people don't have the resources they need to take care of their families? Where I don't know where people are talking about that. I'm literally looking for
same here. Yep.
And it's not there. So it's on us to keep talking about it. And then I think the last thing is we can't organize a revolution online. We're going to have to have meetings, get in one another's faces, sit down, have some difficult conversations. Because if you want to be honest, even in our movement spaces, there are silos, there's division. There are people who don't work with this one and that one, who's too radical, who's too liberal, who's too. We're going to have to figure all of that stuff out, but it's not going to happen where the rest of the world gets to see it. There's going to have to be some internal work done. And I'll tell you, in this book, one of the most difficult parts, because my first book, I spent a lot of time in state of emergency talking about America. So it's easy to point that way and tell people, go left, go right. This was about me. And I had to take an internal check on what's going on in here. Some of that stuff that's out in the shed, I buried it. It's back in the back of the house. I don't want to think about it anymore. I don't want to talk about it. It's in the chest. I had to open that stuff up and make sure that I dealt with it. I put it on these pages, but I'm also dealing with it in therapy. And I really seriously want us as a movement to do some internal checks and look at where we are, where we stand, how we work together, how we don't work together. And, really make an assessment, because otherwise we're not going to survive this moment. I'm just being honest. It's no way we can fight each other and them. We've got to get ourselves on the same page. So I think that's the work first. And lastly, just on the more technical side, the midterms are coming. We cannot wait until 2 years from now to be running around fire hose. Everybody, you're killing yourself. You out walking day and night, knocking on, introducing people to who's running. You got folks inside of the booth getting ready to vote, calling on the phone. Hey, who am I supposed to vote? No, we can't. We have to do the work now to ensure that by the time we get to 2 years, people are able to help us create some balance in this situation.
Amen, amen, and amen. Last thing, and then you go sell that book.
I'm book slanging.
But that's right, book slanging. What the Decency Initiative? Because everything we talked about seemed to connect back to that.
Yeah.
If you could, real quick, just frame that up for us from the book. What that is?
Yeah. So the Decency Initiative was a time when after Don Imus called the women Rutgers basketball players, nappy-headed hoes. We were, everything went up in smoke. You remember that? It was like, how did So, I mean, we were like ready to fight. It was like, people getting the switchblade out. Like, who are you talking about?
Putting that Vaseline on there.
It was like, who you talking about, your mama? Like, what we talking? So it got nasty. But one of the things that we continued to hear was people saying, well, what about the music that y'all listen to? Like, nobody's going to talk about that. No one's going to bring up that the same type of language is basically being used in your own music to describe women, who look like you. And so it was
one of my biggest issues with our music is how we talk about our women.
I took on that fight. Reverend Sharpton was like, hey, go on out there and, organize the people. And I took on that fight to say that we've got to challenge ourselves to do better. Not that we need to be censored, not that artists shouldn't have creative control. But if you're going to go out there and call these same women nigga, bitches, and hoes, and then be mad at the white man for saying that, that's a problem. And so that's what the Decency Initiative was about. And guess what? I got a lot of heat because the people were like,
you did.
I don't know who you think you're telling. But you know what? Then I met with artists. I met with T.I. And of course, Sean at the time, Diddy was, had so many different clients. So, at the time, it was so, Kevin Lyles, everybody had a lot of artists everywhere. Russell Simmons, everybody. So I got a chance through their allowing me to go into spaces to sit and have conversations. And I'll just tell you this, The one thing that worked, I said, listen, when Michael Jackson put in his song, Don't Jew Me Down, right? They took the song off the shelves, took that out of the lyrics,
Yep.
and then re-released the song, right? And so I would say to them, this community said, no, you will not use that type of language on your record because it helps to spike anti-Semitism. You know, it doesn't help us, right?
Right.
So why are we okay with anything? Our communities, you just say whatever you want. And we were ahead of our time because now some of the most prominent artists have said, we got to deal with the language in our music. So you sometimes catch a stray on the front end, but on the back end, people will appreciate your work. You just got to stand on business.
Yes, indeed. Well, I appreciate your work. I appreciate you. Love your journey. I love the personal way you tell it and share it. And I think people really will see a little bit of themselves in that little girl in church. Everybody's telling, would you please just sit down and be quiet?
Exactly.
To that activist that people were saying, would you please just be quiet?
Yeah. Now people are saying, would you please talk?
There you go.
So thank you. I live to tell the story.
Amen. Amen. Tamika D. Mallory. She is a trailblazer in so many ways. It's a real treat to have her be with us on the podcast. Thank you, Tamika. All the best with the book, folks. Again, I Live to Tell the Story, a memoir of love, legacy, and resilience. It's out now. Please pick up a copy and enjoy that journey because, believe it or not, it's part of your journey too. So until next time, y'all, be safe, be well. Don't get hung up on stupid. Please, please don't. Please find the lane in which you can begin to do something actively to safeguard our institutions and our government, because it's all we got. It's the line between your home and sitting in a jail because the Department of Justice decided you've become a problem. Right. So understand the moment we're in. Until next time, God bless.